3 cars. Combined, they've sold for millions at auction. People obsess over them, chase them, build shrines around them. And for most of you watching, they are some of the worst purchases you can make right now. That is not a knock on the cars. The 1970 Hemi Cuda is a legitimate American treasure. The LS6 Chevelle rewrote what a factory muscle car could do. The Boss 429 Mustang is a piece of engineering history. Every one of those statements is true, but there is a massive difference between a great car and a great buy. And that gap between myth and math is exactly where a lot of enthusiasts get destroyed. So let's be real. No hype, no nostalgia fog, just the honest breakdown. Which cars are burning money at the auction block right now, and which ones are quietly sitting there waiting for someone smart to notice them? The cars you should walk away from. Start at the top of the food chain, the 1970 Hemi Cuda. The 426 Hemi made 425 horsepower on paper. Real-world output was almost certainly higher, and Chrysler's engineers knew it. That number was politically convenient during an era when insurance companies were already sharpening their knives. The hemispherical combustion chamber, the massive 4.25-inch bore, the dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors. This was not a street car that went racing. It was a race car that went to the showroom. To put the rarity in perspective, they destroyed more Chargers filming the Dukes of Hazzard than the total number of 1970 Hemi Cuda convertibles that ever existed. That rarity is real. The problem is that in 2026, you are no longer paying for a driving experience. You are paying for a museum-grade certificate. Next, the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6. 450 horsepower, 500 foot-pounds of torque, solid lifters, 11.25-to-1 compression. GM built this engine to the absolute edge of what pump gas could tolerate. It dominated the quarter-mile and the automotive press in 1970. Around 4,475 LS6 Chevelles were produced that model year, depending on body style, and that exclusivity now carries a brutal entry tax. Here is where it gets complicated for buyers. Authenticating a real LS6 is a forensic exercise. The partial VIN stamp on the firewall pad has to match the door tag and the engine stamp, 3 separate points that all have to align. Beyond that, high-torque big block cars received specific frame reinforcements at the factory that base-model Chevelles did not. Those reinforcements are either there or they are not, and a convincing clone that's missing them tells you everything you need to know. Getting the authentication wrong on a car at this price level is not a paperwork inconvenience, it is a 5-figure mistake. Then there's the Boss 429 Mustang, and this one deserves a closer look because it's actually a fascinating engineering contradiction. Ford pulled the 429 cubic inch engine directly from its NASCAR program. The block was so wide, it required Carcraft to perform significant front-end surgery on the Mustang's engine bay just to fit it. The result was 375 horsepower, semi-hemispherical combustion chambers, and an engine that on paper sounds like an absolute weapon. Except it wasn't, not on the street. Ford used intake valves sized for a NASCAR engine pulling 7,000 RPM on a superspeedway. Those massive valves need high RPM and high airflow to function correctly. Then Ford strangled it with a small 735 CFM Holley carburetor and a mild hydraulic camshaft tuned for street manners. The result is an engine that chokes on its own potential below the power band. A 428 Cobra Jet, a simpler, cheaper engine, would beat it off a stoplight in stock form. The Boss 429 is a race engine that was never allowed to race. It is a museum piece with license plates. Ford built 857 of them in 1969 and 499 in 1970. One sold in January 2026 for $440,000. The authentication burden, the financial exposure, and the fundamental reality that this car was compromised before it left the factory put the Boss 429 in a category that has nothing to do with the joy of driving a muscle car. If you're buying a car that requires a private investigator and a chemical analysis of the paint to verify it's real, are you buying a car or are you buying a lawsuit? The cars that actually make sense. Now, flip the script. The 1968 Oldsmobile 442 is one of the most undervalued pieces of real GM muscle available right now. The GM A-body platform, same bones underneath the Chevelle, a 400 cubic inch V8, factory performance hardware, and genuine street presence. Hagerty's January 2026 guide puts a number 3 condition example at approximately $27,600, with values up 4.2% year over year. It is moving in the right direction, and you are almost always paying less than an equivalent Chevelle for comparable or identical performance. The W30 package, force air induction, aluminum intake, special cam, makes it genuinely competitive. The parts are accessible, the community is serious. This is a driver's car at a driver's price. The 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner 383 sits in a very specific sweet spot, and the 383 versus 426 debate is more interesting than most people realize. Chrysler built the Roadrunner to be cheap and fast by design. Strip the luxury, keep the performance. The 383 cubic inch B-Series big block made 335 horsepower, but it was not a base engine thrown in as an afterthought. Chrysler tuned it specifically for the Roadrunner. Better cylinder heads, a more aggressive camshaft, and exhaust manifolds borrowed directly from the 440. It was a deliberate performance build wearing an economy car price tag. Here is the part that surprises people. On 2026 pump gas, a well-sorted 383 Roadrunner will frequently outrun a neglected Hemi car that's fouling plugs every 20 miles. The Hemi needs to be maintained correctly, tuned correctly, and run on fuel it can actually use to deliver what the mythology promises. The 383 just runs. That is the practical performance argument, and it is a real one, not a consolation prize. Hagerty's January 2026 data shows a number 3 condition Roadrunner at around $34,100, down 7.8% from the prior guide. A dip in value on a car this entertaining is a buyer's window. The 1970 AMC Javelin is the contrarian pick, and that's exactly why it works. The 390 cubic inch AMC V8 made 325 horsepower in base configuration. The AMX package was a legitimate Trans Am competitor. Mark Donohue drove a factory-backed Javelin to the 1971 Trans Am Championship. These cars have real racing DNA, and they have never carried the market premium that equivalent Camaros or Mustangs demand. Mid-$30,000 for a solid 1970 example puts you in a car that stands out at every event. The caveat is genuine. Documented originals matter, and certain trim pieces are legitimately hard to source. Buy a solid car, and that becomes manageable. The 1968 Pontiac GTO, not the Judge, not a Ram Air hero car, is the most underrated entry on this entire list. And there is a detail most people miss entirely. The 1968 GTO was the first American production car to use an Endura bumper. While every other manufacturer was bolting on heavy chrome, Pontiac used a body-colored, energy-absorbing urethane material that was color-matched to the car. It was 15 years ahead of the industry. It is the reason the 1968 GTO has a cleaner, more modern front fascia than the 1969 cars that followed it, and it is part of why traditionalists of the era were skeptical of it. That historical skepticism has never fully left the car's reputation. And right now, that works entirely in your favor as a buyer. The base 400 cubic inch V8 made 350 horsepower in standard form. The optional Ram Air 2 pushed that to 366. These are real performance numbers on a platform that John DeLorean and the Pontiac team used to invent the muscle car segment in 1964. Hagerty's January 2026 tool shows a number 3 condition standard GTO at approximately $20,600, down 9.6% year over year. There is a reason that number is moving the direction it is. The original buyer demographic for blue chip muscle, the generation that watched these cars roll off the showroom floor, is exiting the collector market. The The buyers replacing them are Gen X and millennial enthusiasts who have now accumulated real money, and they want cars they can actually drive, not statues, not display pieces. The Hemi Cuda and the LS6 Chevelle are statue cars. The GTO at $20,600 is a high-production icon from the car that started the entire genre, being ignored by the investment-only crowd, sitting at one of the most honest prices in the classic muscle market. That is a steal by any serious measure. Why this matters? The supply of genuine muscle cars is fixed. There will never be another one built. The generational wave that initially drove values to the stratosphere is rotating out, and the buyers coming in want to use these machines, not insure them into paralysis. The window to buy something real, drive it, and not treat it like a vault on wheels is narrowing. The Hemi Cuda and the LS6 Chevelle are already past that point. The Boss 429 was past it before most of you were watching car content. The 4442, the Roadrunner, the Javelin, the GTO, these are still in the window. Real engineering, real history, real performance, price points that let you actually turn the key. The best muscle car to buy is the one you can drive without a security detail. That is not a compromise. That is the entire point of these machines. If you want to go deeper, there are 3 specific factory anomalies that can prove a $20,000 GTO is actually a mislabeled Ram Air car. The kind of hidden tricks engineers use to sneak real performance past the front office without it ever showing up in the paperwork. That breakdown is the next video.